Today in Spatial Realities, take immersive videos with the iPhone 15 Pro. Grab your free MetaQuest Pro at Roblox Developer Conference, check out MetaQuest 3 specs and win 2 tickets for AWE in Europe.
Today, we're going to talk about the Metaverse.
The next evolution of the internet, called the Metaverse, will be extended with 3D.
And we call this the Metaverse. The Metaverse. The Metaverse. The Metaverse. The Metaverse.
Introducing Apple Vision Pro.
Welcome to the 49th episode of Spatial Realities. My name is Thomas Riedel and I'm a tech journalist based in Cologne, Germany. In this podcast you learn all about XR, Metaverse, immersive media and spatial computing, especially for B2B and what it means for your business. Holidays are clearly over. That's at least what I can report from my daily business. And if you take care of XR news, you might have recognized a considerable increase in hardware news. HTC, Lynx, Somnium, Xreal and many more companies have smaller and bigger news about their upcoming headsets or how to make their existing ones better. To talk about them all in this podcast would be too much, so check out my almost weekly newsletter I've linked for you in the show notes. The most important news, at least from my point of view, you hear in a few moments in this episode. In the long interview, I'm happy to talk to Danile Maas from Danish VR Startup VRPilot. Daniel and his team has been working on a cockpit simulator since he dropped out from a big defense company in late 2019. The first contract was with the Royal Danish Airforce and the team had to show in a couple of months that they can actually deliver what they sold. From there on, the proof of concept convinced many more companies like DHL or Alaska Airlines to use VRPilot. When COVID hit the globe, their approach to use standalone headsets really paid out. Learn in this in-depth interview how VR is a perfect medium to train pilots and prepare them in a safe, fast and cheap way for even the worst situations while being in air. Because you know what they say, takeoff is optional, but landing is mandatory. Before we get straight to the news, I have an event invitation from our partner HTC for you. Don't you sometimes wish you had direct contact with a headset manufacturer for whom you developed customer experiences? That's now possible. On the eve of the Mexico and Digital X, HTC invites you to the HTC Vive Partner Networking event in Cologne. Have direct contact with HTC and exchange ideas with the developer relationship engineer Mark Mukasel from HTC. Another highlight of the Vive Partner Network event, try out the Vive self-tracking tracker along with the Vive XR Elite headset for the first time, for which you no longer need a base station. So, networking, new tech and great food from HTC at the HTC Vive Partner event on 19th September from 6:30 p.m. at the Cologne Startplatz in the Mediapark. Tickets are free, you can find a link in the show notes, hope to see you there. And now to the news. The Apple keynote took place and was as you would have expected it, except a couple of details concerning spatial computing you should not miss. The new Apple Watch has not only a new precision wideband chip, it also comes with a new gesture which makes it easier to use. tap index finger and thumb twice to use the main button, which is on the screen at this moment. You receive a call and want to accept it, but you have a beer in the other hand. Just a normal situation, at least in Germany. Just double tap. You want to scroll through your notifications? Double tap. It's no coincidence that tapping your fingers is the same as at the Apple Vision Pro headset, which was announced earlier this year. Get used to it. This is what this might say from a user experience perspective. And also, let us think about how the Apple Watch can be a helper in recognizing a tap, although the hand is obscured by the Vision Pro cameras. It will be interesting to see how the watch will be integrated in the user experience of the Apple Vision Pro. Another feature you should know about, which will come in handy for the Apple Vision Pro, is the new feature of the iPhone 15 Pro, which lets you capture immersive video. We do not have any other information how this will actually be done, as the lenses are pretty close to each other, nor in which format the video will be or how it will be transferred. But to actually see that, as some experts of the industry predicted, the iPhone will become an immersive media recorder is a great thing. And finally, Tim Cook wanted to confirm that everything is fine with the development of the Apple Vision Pro by saying,
We also unveiled Apple Vision Pro, an entirely new spatial computing platform where your digital content seamlessly blends with your physical space. Everything looks better on Vision Pro, including your favorite TV shows and movies, like the new season of The Morning Show, which starts this week. And the response to Apple Vision Pro has been absolutely amazing. We're so pleased that people are as excited about Apple Vision Pro as we are. Apple Vision Pro has also captured the imagination of our remarkable developer community. We're extremely excited about what they're already showing us in our developer labs around the world. They're creating truly amazing experiences that wouldn't be possible on any other platform. Our Apple team is also making great progress with Vision Pro, and we're on track to ship early next year.
Whatever early next year means. So besides a more or less normal keynote with quite normal product iterations, these tidbits are quite interesting for us spatial dudes and dudettes. Also USB-C. And for me personally, I enjoyed very much how they did a lot of climate stuff. Apple seems to really care. The most popular watch globally is now carbon neutral. That's a good start. Next up is the release of the Meta Quest 3, which finally got its specs leaked and also the official accessories. And there's no big surprise here. The screen, the lenses, the RAM, the battery life and so on, everything we assumed might got confirmed. What I find a bit pricey is the charging dock for $150, which might be more expensive when it arrives in Europe. At that price, it costs a third of what the headset is worth. As we already know everything about the headset, I'm pretty curious how the keynote at Connect in 2 weeks will actually look like. Mark enters the stage and says, "Well dudes, as you already know everything, I will just open the buffet, enjoy the food." Maybe it will be mainly about numbers from the store and the great new experiences everybody was preparing for the launch. We will see. Have you watched the Roblox developer conference? Me neither, but I read the blog post which summarized a couple of things they announced this year. The first thing you will recognize is that Roblox wants to grow up. This is why they will offer a dating app which you can use when you are 17+. And that it actually looks good, they are planning to relaunch the avatar system and pimp it with AI. The picture in the blog post actually looks nothing like Roblox, which is a good thing in my opinion, because now I could actually identify with how the avatar could look like. Of course, there will also be a lot of new tools for developers to easier make avatars look good, look like the user and import different file types. With a text chat in a separate app and a call feature, you could meet with friends before you jump into an experience. That reminds me of MetaQuest home environment and is a good and interesting way to be more in the center of communication. It also feels a bit like a WhatsApp or Snapchat competitor. And third, they are talking about devices. 3 new devices are in the pipeline: Quest headsets, PlayStation and Xbox. And the Quest headsets are in the first position, as the still very rough beta version of the Quest app was downloaded over 1 million times. There's no wonder they see that as their primary next device. So to summarize up what Roblox has for us in future, Roblox grows up, and for the first time I have the feeling Roblox could actually be a part of the Metaverse as it moves on from their very clunky avatar design, moves on more devices, which one of is a VR headset. By the way, if you attended the Roblox developer conference, you would have been gifted a MetaQuest Pro. Yes, everybody received a MetaQuest Pro. I guess Meta wanted to clear their shelves and made a special deal with Roblox. Well played, Meta. And to finalize the news, I want to report a great success for the German XR industry. Room, the Metaverse solution with 3 O's, just received a huge investment of 70 million euros. On LinkedIn, they showed how the CEO Hans Elsner was showered with champagne. If you haven't heard yet about Room, check out episode 25 of this podcast, where I speak in detail with Hans Elsner. And now I want to invite you to join us at AWE Europe this year, taking place at October 24 and 25 in Vienna. Meet with the global XR industry at the most important conference for XR. Make business, network and have a drink or 3 with me, as I will also be attending the whole conference. And as the Spatial Realities Show is an official partner of AWE, I am happy to be able to give away 3 times 2 tickets. And today you can win the first 2 tickets. And that's quite easy. Just send me an email at info@spatialrealities.de. And with that, you will be in the draw to win 2 free tickets. And if you don't want to bet on your luck to get a ticket for free, enjoy the 20% discount code as part of this community. Use Spatial20D to get 20% off your regular ticket price. Again, use Spatial20D, SPATIAL20D to get 20% thanks to our Spatial Realities community discount. By the way, you can find all the links to the news in the show notes. And if you want to talk about spatial computing, Metaverse or the future of 3D internet, you're welcome to join our Discord server, where new interesting people sign up almost every day. Thirsty for a complete overview of what is going on in XR? Check out the Metaverse newsletter, linked also in the show notes. I would also like to ask you to do me a favor. If you have been listening to this podcast for a while and enjoy what I'm doing, I'd be mega happy if you'd write a review on Spotify or iTunes about why this podcast is worth your time. That helps me immensely and maybe convinces others to listen in. Thank you very much.
Next up, I'm very happy to present you another startup of the XR industry. And although what it does seems very close to gaming, it is not. Although quite a lot of flight simulation nerds would love to get their hands on their software and the simulators of VRPilot. a young startup offering virtual reality pilot trainings for customers like Iceland Airlines, the Royal Danish Airforce, or DHL. And to talk about the market of VR pilot trainings and a startup, I'm very happy to welcome Danile Maas. He's the CEO, one of the co-founders, and today's interview guest. Welcome, Daniel.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Great to have you here. So to kick off the talk, I'm wondering if VR pilot training hasn't already become standard. What's the status quo of VR in pilot education?
Well, pilots are, fairly conservative people, and it's a conservative line of business. So unfortunately, not completely standard yet, but we are getting there step by step, customer by customer.
How many pilots have had VR pilot training already? Do you have any numbers for that?
I actually don't know, but just, we have business customers, but we also support your enthusiasts at home that they're able to download the software. And, we have, I think it's around 20,000 downloads in the different stores. So there is some pilots out there and some home nerds that have tested it out. So it's going pretty good, I must say.
Nice to hear. So, but maybe to get us a little bit more view into how pilots get educated. VR pilot training is not yet standard. So you don't have to do any VR pilot training to become a pilot. Is that right?
Yeah, that's completely correct. For now, I think most people have seen, the classical picture of a pilot sitting on a chair and then they have this poster in front of them. It's called a cockpit poster, a fighter bomber. So it's a piece of paper that shows the cockpit, and that's how people train before they go into the very expensive simulators or even into the aircraft. So what we are trying to do is basically making a very, very complicated version of a poster in VR. So it's not standard, but we are trying to take all the benefits of VR and applying it for pilots, and then being able to make sure that the pilots are as efficient as possible when they sit in the aircraft, when they sit in the simulators, because that's where the big money is.
You're actually telling us people are sitting in front of a sheet of paper where they printed the buttons of an airplane and they have to push the printed buttons on the piece of paper.
Yeah, that's around that. And then there is this standing joke in the industry that if you look at the pictures from back then and now, what's the difference? And the difference is that nowadays they print the paper in colors. So it's a very efficient way of training, and everybody can have a poster. And I think most pilots that are, above 35 or something can remember the days where they are, sitting with their piece of paper on the wall and then pretending to press all the buttons and talking to themselves. So we're just trying to take this into the next century.
There's just somebody missing, laying on the ground behind the chair, and when the pilot is pushing a wrong button, he will just rumble the chair very strong and to simulate that he did something wrong.
Yeah, exactly. And you're pointing out one of the key features about digitalizing this cockpit training, right? Because as it is right now, when you're sitting in front of a button, you can teach yourself all kinds of bad habits. There's nobody to tell you what you're doing is right or wrong, and there's no indication of what you're doing is right or wrong. So by having that in a VR headset, you can all of a sudden have, you can only train the right way, and all of a sudden you can streamline the way you are training, and then, instead of practicing the wrong thing, you're always practicing the right thing, which is, in any training organization is like the golden target.
We will come to that because it's very interesting to hear from you that it's much more about the process and not so much about technology, what one could actually think. Like, of course, you have to know something about the tech of an airplane to fly an airplane, but how much a process is important for flying an airplane. We will hear from you later in this interview, so stay tuned for these insights. But as you already know, I'm always interested in the history of a startup because that tells us a lot about its roots and its strengths. So what's the history of founding VRPilot? Where did it all start?
Yeah, it's a bit, I think as most startups, it's always a bit of a funny story hidden there. Either it's start at a bar or start at some other workplace or something like that. But the story is that I used to work at a large military and defense company, and I saw these AR applications that came along and was like, we need to, this company that I work at, they do like aircraft parts, and we spend thousands of hours of making 3D models, and then we draw a 2D drawing and then give it to the production, and then they will assemble something based on a drawing. So I wanted to digitalize that a lot. Long story short, we got a little a little project going on in that company. And then all of a sudden, one of my colleagues from the mechanical department came and said, he's a pilot and he was testing the VR headsets out. And he was like, this is very good for pilots, because especially when you're learning to fly an aircraft, a landing is one of the hardest thing. There's this saying that takeoff is optional, but landing is mandatory. Yeah. So you need to learn how to do this. So he came to me and we started playing around with the VR headsets. We need to do something about it professionally, because there is a market for this stuff. So that's actually where it all started.
Yeah. And when was that?
So it was late 2018. So we founded the company officially in 2019. We were still employed by the other company, so we needed to get some approvals that we are allowed to start this thing. Again, they work primarily in the military and defense segment, and we were very much going for like the commercial flying schools and hopefully airlines in the future. At least that was what we thought. So it's pretty easy to say that, we'll only go for the commercial stuff 1 year ahead, and looking at who was the first customer of ours that was the Royal Danish Airforce. So, it didn't go as the preacher said, but it was a bit of a coincidence, but it's a fun one.
Yeah. So great story. And the question is, how did you start off in the first place? So did you get yourself a Quest device? What was your first approach? And I'm probably sure you changed everything after a year.
Well, actually, we started out by making. So my colleague used to fly gliders, and in gliding, it's again landing is a big thing. And he started making like a flight simulator out of 4x4 pieces of wood and a rift and a computer, and then they made like a flight simulator. And we were kind of that's where we kind of started, because we were really interested in this thing about learning how to fly the aircraft, because you can all of a sudden look around. The VR benefit of the VR is that you have a 3D space and you're only not limited to a screen in front of you. So that's where we started with the Rift. And then, the whole idea of making something portable, since the Quest came out, gave the possibilities to make something that was portable, and then going a little bit away from learning how to land the aircraft to actually learning how to press all the buttons in the bigger aircraft kind of came as a spin-off of that idea, which is the one that we are.
So the first iteration was actually landing an airplane. So spawned in a flying airplane, and then suddenly you had to land it?
Yeah, it was more of an integration thing where we were trying to make most hobby pilots have their Microsoft Flight Simulator or their X-Plane at home, and they have some setup with a bunch of wires, and it's a little bit nerdy and geeky and trying to get it run. So we're trying to make like integration into like a standardized frame where you can change out between different cockpits. It needs to be said that when you're learning how to fly, you will go to like a flying school or university if it's in the US. And here you will start out by learning how to fly a single engine aircraft, and then a twin engine, and then you'll go to something bigger, like where you have to learn how to do multi-crew stuff in one of these airliners or whatnot. So our idea was that we made like so you can change between like smaller configurations. So going from one cockpit to the other one, from one single engine to a twin engine, it was like a couple of minutes of swapping out some connectors, and then you had you had 2-in-1 kind of thing. So that's where it all started.
So you have been two guys sitting together, starting with the Rift. You probably had to pay some bills now and then. How did you get your first cash? How did the startup evolve from there?
Yeah, well, most of the company have been funded by me selling my apartment and then moving into a rental apartment instead. So that's basically how it all started. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so it's been, especially in the beginning, it's been very bootstrapping and trying to grow organically and try to figure out if this makes sense, right? We wanted to take it like one step at a time, and especially in the beginning, we had full-time jobs. So this was weekends and nights and whatnot, which I think is a pretty good way of starting. After a little bit more than a year in Denmark, we have something called the Innovation Fund, where you can apply for like a scholarship of some sort, where they have specific programs for people that are sitting in engineering jobs or pretty well paid jobs, and trying to get them to resign and start do a startup. So you get paid a decent salary for a year, and then they will provide you with some money for equipment and whatnot. So we were, I think, a couple of 100 people that applied for that, and I think we're some 20 or something that won it, 20 different companies, and we were fortunate to be one of those. So that's actually where it all started, where we then resigned our jobs, and that thing started the 1st of July in 2020, it must be. And then, the first, I think a week before we started full time, we visited the Danish Air Force, Royal Danish Airforce, and showed them our prototype of the procedure trainer, which we're going to talk about later. And they were like, interesting. When can we have it? And we're like, they wanted it like a month later. So it's like, okay, say goodbye to that summer break and then full steam ahead. But that's the way it is.
All right, cool. So what I'm also interested is in the step from you had some ideas of what the interior of a cockpit should look like to the knowledge how to actually fly an airplane. I think these are two different things, and the step between them is pretty big. How did you get all the information how to fly an airplane and how to get it into the simulation? Because also just knowing stuff doesn't mean you're actually able to put it all in VR and make that happening there.
No, exactly. Well, I'm an engineer by trade, so I have good ideas of how stuff works, but essentially I don't know that much, right? So my colleague Thor is his biggest dream were to become a commercial pilot. Unfortunately for him, fortunate for me, he's color dyslexic, so he can't see the difference between red and green. And since green is right and red is left in an aircraft, you kind of sort of need to know which is which. So he became an engineer instead. So he's always been super interested in flying and using flight simulators and these types of software. So he's very knowledgeable, even though he's not a commercial pilot. He is then afterwards taking the instructors, so he now can teach commercial pilots how to fly an aircraft. But it actually started out, based on we had an idea of how things worked, and then from a startup perspective, I think one of the most important things to remember when you're starting a company, there are so many people. If you just ask them politely, they will spend a lot of time on helping you, just because they think if your project is fun or they can see the future in it. It doesn't always have to be about money. A lot of people are willing to, if you give them a Coca-Cola or whatnot, and then they will spend like a Saturday or a Sunday with you just trying to explain how stuff works. That's always at least as long as you're not arrogant about that you're Mr. Know-it-all, a lot of people in general want to help you. So we created a advisory board where we tried to get, a couple of people in to start off with. So somebody who knows a lot about the military, somebody knows a lot about, we have a guy that has been flying Airbus A320s for I think he has close to 20,000 hours in the cockpits, a captain. And just having these people to, create the idea, make something people can see, and then ping pong your way into having something that actually works. And then, there is this saying that if you are not a little bit ashamed about your first product, you have been waiting too long to launch it, right? So I think there's a lot of elements in it.
So 1 month later, you actually shipped a product to the Royal Danish Airforce?
Yeah, it was a pretty intense month, I must admit. The cool thing about the Air Force is that the Danish Air Force is that they use it for a fairly small aircraft, so it's not the most complex one around. The unfortunate thing is that I don't think there's many of them flying around. It's like a Saab T-17 trainer. I can't remember if it was introduced into the Danish Air Force in 70 or 75, so it's a fairly old aircraft. Obviously, it's been modernized a couple of times. Though it was not the easiest thing to get started with because there was not that much data available, but it was just a great fun. And then, I think from the Air Force perspective, this was something new. This was a new way of training. So there was a lot of enthusiasm from their side. And we have an instructor that helped us quite a lot. There is some, when you use VR, you can only get so close to the real world, right? And when you're flying, you're using your feet a lot. And since there's no controllers to wrap around your feet, I at least haven't seen them. There are some things that you have to figure out how do you do it so it feels right and it's not in the way. And that's where having these, we call them subject matter experts. So, a person from the airline or for the Danish Air Force to give us some input on how do we do this, and we kind of agree on it. I guess everybody who has been doing software in general knows that if there's 200 people, then there's 200 opinions on how things should do. So you need to be able to have some key people that you can talk to and then agree on a way forward. So, we owe a lot to the Royal Danish Air Force for understanding the idea and then going with it. So it's been a very good reference. So, but yeah, the thing about it took a month. It's something where you have to pinch yourself because that's not typically how it goes.
Absolutely. This month might be one of the most valuable months for your startup in the beginning, because you had the chance to actually deliver a product, and maybe it was even a good thing that it was just an old small plane, not to sound too harsh about that, but maybe it was good that it was not the most flown airplane out there, and then all the pilots crashed because of you made a mistake. So. What were the learnings from that month, shipping the first product to the first customer?
I don't think we have this podcast is not long enough to go through the whole list, because there's there's this term called drinking from a fire hose, right? There's just so many information that you have to figure out, and you're laying the tiles when you're walking on them, right? Or the pavement while you're walking on it. There are so many things from, just basically we had a piece of software that we knew we could do the implementation on. We had people that we have shown it to, and they of course came with feedback. But when you have a customer who's actually paying for something, all of a sudden their feedback is just so much more, and is so much more intense. And, you're so afraid that they don't like what you're providing to them. So they just gave us a lot of good feedback. And, if I had to do it all over, I don't think we could have done it in any better way with a customer like the Air Force, because within this line of field, if you go to a flying school, you're paying a lot of money to become a pilot. It's fairly expensive, especially in, even in Denmark, I can become a mechanical engineer and a master of science without spending €1 single on my education, but I have to pay a pilot license all by myself, right? So the students, rightfully so, can be very picky on if there's training devices that, adds value and whatnot. Where the Air Force, they offer training for very skilled people, and these skilled people just take in everything that they can, because, they are going to fly F-16s and stuff like that in the end, right? So every training device they can use is usually a positive thing. Just having these people and just getting to know that, and getting on the understanding of, okay, it makes sense to, when you have a lot of headsets, you need to have like a management control system to update them. Otherwise you have to put in a cable to 30 headsets, and that's not a good thing to start with. Have to put stickers on the controllers, because when you have 60 controllers laying on a table, it takes roughly 4.5 seconds, and then you're standing with the wrong controllers in your hand, and all those types of things from, there were so many things. It was such a good process. It was so nerve-wracking, but it was so nice, and I'm so pleased about the result and the way they have taken us under their arms, right?
Yeah, so the starting phase went very well for you, with the first customer learning so much, but how did it go on in the next couple of years? What were the next big steps? And maybe also, as this is a podcast about, of course, all the immersive stuff, maybe also sprinkle a little bit of techno VR bubble into that. So because the technology also evolved, right? So we have totally different technologies today than 5 years ago. How did all this go along?
It's a bit of a funny thing. You start out with the military, and then you go to the commercial flying schools and be like, yeah, but it's the military, they're different. And then we got the next customer you got was a local flying school here in Denmark doing commercial pilots. And then when you go to, just to a little bit, maybe give a little bit of input. So you start at a commercial school. That's when you get your quote unquote driver's license. And then you typically go to like a type rating center afterwards, where you get type rated to an aircraft. So you can then get a type rating for an airline. And then you go to the airline and fly. You can also get the type rating at the airline. So it's a little bit depending. But there's a lot of first customers. So the first military, the first commercial school, the first type rating, the first airlines. So we kind of had to have one of each before we can say that we had, the first customer. But it went pretty well. I think having the Royal Danish Airforce as a stamp of approval helped us tremendously, because the Danish Air Force is high regarded as being very skilled, and they don't spend time on stupid things. I think
most of the time,
of course. And then I think also one of the key features, right? So we launched to the Royal Danish Air Force. That was on the Quest 1. And then the Quest 2 came before we launched to the next customer. And just, I really appreciate the Quest 1 as a device, but There's also some things that was not perfect. Obviously, the Quest 2 was not perfect either, but just the step and the performance and the clarity, it just helps us, because at the end of the day, with these types of training, no matter if it's in pilots or if it's you're doing in ships or whatnot, you are trying not to give people bad behaviors. And one of the things that we have seen is that the relatively low resolution that you have on the standalone devices, especially in the beginning, that will automatically force people to lean forward. So if you're sitting in a chair and you have to read a text, then you will lean forward to read the text. But you don't want people to get this, default reaction of leaning forward when they have to read something. So that's been one of the limitation factors in the beginning that you want to explain to people. It becomes better next year, but you can kind of sort of read what's there, and then next generation, now you can almost read what's there. But from a technical perspective, these devices just get better and better and better, and then starting implementing the eye tracking we started on the Pico Neo 3 Pro Eye, and adding the eye tracking, we were kind of sort of hesitant because we didn't feel like that it was worth it, maybe, because, is there really a big difference between if you move your head or you move your eyes to look at a dial or a gauge or something? But it turned out pretty fast that it actually adds value. And now, the next thing is the facial tracking, right? If you're sitting with training with a pilot and you can see that he's smiling all the time and he's, chilled and relaxed and he knows that he's everything under control, that confidence, that must be way nicer to teach a person like that, or something that is sitting, just shaking and trying to just be on par on the training. So just having these things that allow an instructor to see where people are looking, see how they are reacting, even though you're not in the same room. All of a sudden, the VR headset are adding more value that you could get from sitting in front of the person or sitting behind them in a simulator and whatnot. So actually, from starting with a basic Quest 1 and then to the Pico 3 continuing on, all of a sudden you're adding more things that the instructors are not used to have. And that's hopefully the way that will make VR become a standard thing in pilot training, as we started out by talking about.
And as we are talking already about the devices, that's of course a very important thing. And to be honest, I was rather surprised when you told me the first time that you started with a Quest 1. Yes, it is a good device, but to be honest, the resolution is bullshit. You can't read anything. And there are other devices out there which I thought would be better for training. And there are, of course, people using those headsets. But why was it actually not so important to have that brilliance on the graphics?
It also needs to be taken into a time, right? We started in 2020, and I think as most, we started the whole procedure training experience in 2020. And I think most people remember there was a little thing called COVID that kind of sort of made people force people to work from home. We were just from day one very aware that pilots are people that are traveling. Pilots are not, it's not a 9-to-5 job where you go home every night and, sleep in your own bed. It's more like that you go out for periods of time and you have flying, and you could even be sitting in a hotel in another country, and the night before that you have to be at a training session. So for us, it was more important to have the portability. So pilots can have, they have this audio headset that they carry around when they're out flying. And then in the other hand, they have this little bag with a Quest 1 or Quest 2 device. And then they can carry it into the hotel room and whatnot, and then train on the run. So we were just very aware of that. We wanted everything to run on the device, and it needed to be portable. And then we just had to, make some sacrifices to make sure that it did run, and then just, be very stringent on, does this feature add value, or is it just nice to have, kind of? So, that's one of the things. We don't prioritize that much the area around the aircraft. This is a cockpit procedure trainer. You're practicing flows in a cockpit. So there's no fancy mountains or, it's a very basic environment around the aircraft. But at the end of the day, that's not what matters in this type of training device.
It's not the Microsoft Flight Simulator where you want to fly next to the Empire State Building or something like that. Of course not. It's not sightseeing.
No, exactly. This is, it's very pilot, nerdy, geeky understanding, which button to press in the right order. And it sounds so simple, but I think most people have seen a cockpit from inside in a movie or from pictures and whatnot. I think people can understand that there is, hundreds and hundreds of buttons, and there's so much to check, and there's so many things to understand about what the buttons does. And this is what just makes air travel as safe as it is today, right? The pilots know what to do. So if there's engine failure or whatnot, they can be calm as possible, and that saves a lot of life. So, if you're pressing buttons, then you don't care about the very nice mountain outside.
Would you have done the Quest 1 route when there would have not been COVID?
Yes. I think COVID helped in regards to, actually, one of the main things was the sales process. The fact that people can, you could sit with, I can talk to you here, we're, full disclosure, we're not sitting in the same room.
Surprise.
It's a surprise.
We're sitting in the same cockpit.
Yeah, exactly. But we, looking back 5 years, then I might have traveled to you and sitting down with you face to face. And of course that does something different. But I think the whole COVID thing, from our perspective, it helped understanding that training, bringing the cockpit with you wherever you are, or if you are home, in quarantine or whatnot, just making this possible, make me say, yes, we, from day one, I'm so happy that the timing of the Quest was there when we started. It was released before we started, but had we started 1 year before, right, then I don't know if I knew that it was coming. But on the other hand, you had the Quest Go before that, and obviously it's only a free DOF cockpit. But maybe that would have been the way I started instead. I was never a big fan of the lighthouses and the blue HTC Vive golf ball VR headset where you have to have cables and Windows Update and whatnot. It just makes life so much more complicated, and it's difficult to scale.
It was great that the Quest 1 was here and you just use it, and it was a perfect match at the end. So let's make a little jump. So of course, more customers, more planes added to your products. We have 2023, 5 years later. Where is VRPilot right now? How many people are in your team? What kind of trainings do you offer? Give us a little bit of a roundabout.
Yeah, so the team has not grown that much, which actually comes to a big of a surprise when we talk to our customers. We have roughly 20-something customers divided into military, smaller flying schools, larger, it's called HO, like Approved Training Organization. You have universities, and, our biggest customer in regards to pilots is Alaska Airlines, and I think their pilot count is around 3,500 or 3,300 or something like that. So it's huge numbers, right? So we are actually just 3 people. So we're trying to be very efficient the way we do it. The best thing about doing this type of training is it's very streamlined in that regard. Everybody speaks English. There's a finite amount of cockpits. So once you have done the A320, of course, there's some customization because some customers chose some different options. Like when you buy a car, some have the deluxe package and some have the basic package, and it's the same way in aircraft. But once you have started to have, these aircraft, implementing new customers becomes very, very, very easy and very, very fast. So right now we are 3 people sitting full time. I say full time. I think it's
120% time.
I don't see my apartment that much in periods of time. And then we have our advisory board, and then we have, we're trying to be as efficient as possible because we want to do processes, optimize processes, so we can implement customer material as good as possible. And then we are very, very much focused on what's called make buy. So every time there's a new feature, it's, do we just buy this feature from an external company, or do we develop it ourselves? If we develop it ourselves, what could we not do in that period of time? Admittedly, it's not healthy to continue working 3 people like this with this amount of pressure. But again, we started out somewhere and just growing. And then as I see it, we will be more people in the near future. But we are also very conservative, where we want to, don't outgrow ourselves and end up by having a lot of people sitting waiting on something to do. Again, this is not standard. You can't get your hours in VR, get any, there's no check mark to have in the training book. and we won't be there for a period of time. So we need to have this stamp of approval from multiple customers. And then it's like a snowball, it starts rolling. And then all of a sudden, of course, you need to employ people before it starts rolling too fast. But you also need to make sure that you don't have too much, you're not spending too much money, before it gets rolling, right? So it's always a very, very difficult fine line to meet. I'm pretty happy with the fact that we're able to have military. Basically, our product portfolio our customer portfolio is all over the world, basically, and it's from the small airline that have 100 pilots, and then the one that has 3,500, and it's basically the same software that are using it. So I think that's pretty cool that you're able to support both.
I mean, it's actually from the technology standpoint not that difficult, I could imagine, because once you have that cockpit bubble around you, there's nothing more to do. I mean, you can add the fancy mountain in the background, but why? So it's more like, okay, how can you optimize, for example, the FPS, or make buttons more viewable? Try to do something with eye tracking so that you have something like foveated rendering or something like that. But I can see that you actually don't need that much people. And what I also find very interesting is how big is the market? Because there are not endless numbers of pilots out there. There are not endless numbers of airlines, although there are a couple of airlines. And when we watch the market of airlines, I mean, it's not like the big cruisers on the oceans where people say, okay, we don't want to do that anymore because it's so bad for the environment. But how is the market developing in your point of view? Is it growing? Is it shrinking? I guess something changes.
It is growing for sure. There's always this thing about if you want big aircraft, few big aircraft, or a lot smaller aircraft, a higher amount of smaller aircraft. What we see is that there is a huge demand of pilots right now. COVID had the effect that there was a lot of people that have been living in the hotels for X amount of years and found out that it was actually pretty decent to be at home too. So there was a lot of pilots that was, moving towards the pension. They might have to go in pension, in 5 years or whatnot. So they decided to quit a little earlier. So coming out of COVID, there's just been a huge demand, because who starts becoming a pilot and paying a lot of money for an education in the middle of a global pandemic when there's no aircraft that is flying around, right? So there's been like a big void, lack of pilots. So it is growing a lot. And I don't see that it's going to change anytime soon. You'll just see that, the more and more aircraft are, getting more and more efficient. And, from my perspective, if it's flying on oil from, French fries oil, or it flies on jet fuel, they still have to press all the buttons in the cockpit, right? So, and even if it goes electric, right, it still requires still the same amount of, if not even more, systems that you need to check and make sure it works. I'm not that aware, and, there is a lot of airlines. Just go out to if you sit in Frankfurt Airport, no, maybe not Frankfurt is a good example because that's Lufthansa, right? But if you just sit at these major airlines, just look outside, how many different airlines, how many aircraft that flies around. And, the whole, the fact that one thing is the passengers, but you also have all the cargo, so as DHL, right? And that's typically like the elderly aircraft or the older aircraft. So when they are finished flying with passengers, then they are converted into cargo aircraft. So this is aircraft that are, very, very old, and there's not that much training available or training material available and whatnot. So I don't see that we are running out of business anytime soon. And there will be a lot of cockpits to build in the future too. I don't think that we will, I don't know how to put that, but I think the demand will be bigger and bigger and bigger because people is going to be, it's going to be more and more and more efficient. So training like VR, where it's relatively cheap, is going to be a high focus because, the tickets needs to be cheaper and, cut costs all where you can. So if you come up in a situation where you can save that 1 hour in the big simulator and then have it in VR, then you all of a sudden have a business case that is very, very easy for everybody to understand. And that's just gonna, make us grow even more. And then, before we started today, we talked a little bit about the Apple VR headset, right? And all of a sudden, what happens when we all have a headset? What happens when it's just everybody has a headset and they're wearing it all the time, right? The market just explodes because then more people want to try to become a pilot, or people have their own devices, and it's a super interesting to just track what goes on.
So you, of course, watched the Apple keynote, I guess. And how was your impression about the Apple keynote? And did you just run to your laptop and started developing for the Apple headset, or how do you take that?
I was like, why don't I live in the US so I can go watch this thing? It's gonna be very, very interesting to see what's gonna happen. Obviously, it's an expensive device, and I don't see many customers being willing to pay that much money for such a device. But if Apple or the next generation headsets is gonna offer something where you can say, okay, if you buy the Pico headset, then you cannot make your hours count in your logbook for the aircraft. But if you buy the Apple one, because the resolution is so high or whatnot, and that automatically enables that you can do this type of training, then it's just gonna explode. It's an insane piece of kit. I will be looking forward to trying it and just getting the feel, because I think it was a little bit difficult from the keynote to understand how everything actually worked. Mm-hmm. And there were some things that didn't talk about. But I think it's, whenever there will be like a Vision Air or whatever they will call it at some point.
Would be a great name for a VR pilot training software.
Exactly. So can we get that and go it out to the masses? Then, of course, we have not started developing for it yet. And I don't think within near future we'll have anybody asking for it. But it will be it is on the development list at some point, but right now we're just focused on getting some airlines instead.
And you're probably developing in Unity, right?
Yes, we do it in Unity, and
it will be easy to make the shift to the Apple headset when it's there then.
Yes, exactly. And it's we started out by using, as we talked about, the Quest, and then some point down the line it was like, oh, these Pico headsets could also do something cool, and then the HTC Vive Focus 3 came along, and then we wanted to do it on iPad. So we've been very fortunate that we have done it in Unity from day one, and we've been able to relatively easy export it to all the different platforms. It's
not very easy, but it's easy.
it's
software.
It could be worse.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
It's ones and zeros, right?
Yeah. If somebody can afford a Apple headset, I guess these are the pilots, right? So, from the customer side, that's a no-brainer, right? They love good quality. They love looking good. They love having the jet set and doing all the stuff. So if somebody will walk around with an Apple headset, that will be the pilots. And it actually looks a little bit like a pilot glasses, like Top Gun style thing. So absolutely. So it fits perfectly.
Yeah, it's just worth it's very difficult to talk about these pilots things without understanding how stuff really works, because you would imagine that if you see the same A320 or whatever aircraft parked, even though it has different airline names on it, you kind of sort of assume that it's operated in the same manner, but it's actually not the case. You will see that there is differences between how an American company or a European company will manage their aircraft fleet. So that's why every time we have a customer, we do some kind of a customization. And this customization is proprietary data, based on data from the airline. So it's a little bit hard to, we can't resell Alaska Airlines procedures to all the Alaska pilots, even though they can afford the nice headset. They'll have to get it from Alaska. I saw this interview with Mark Zuckerberg not that long ago where he was like, so how do you see the Quest 3 being up to par with the headset? And his response was like, yeah, he thinks there's going to be a lot of people that look at the Apple headset be like, I want one of those. Then they will see the price tag, and then they will look at the Quest 3 and be like, oh, I'll take this one for it.
Yeah,
because at the end of the day, it is niche and it is pricey. And I think there will be a lot of people that want to start out with something maybe a little bit cheaper to understand, make sure there's not going to be another device on your shelf that you don't use, right?
Yeah, and the Quest 3 will be very good. So I'm pretty concerned. I will also get the Quest 3 because it's earlier than any other headset. I have the Quest 2 here and I'm pretty satisfied with it, but can't wait for grabbing a Quest 3. And I'm pretty sure they are so hard producing it already because people want to wear that headset. So let's get a little bit more into the VR stuff. What is good about training VR pilots in VR? Why is it so effective? Why does it work?
If you look at what the alternative is that looking into a poster. If looking on a poster and then squeezing your finger against the wall, if that's kind of your baseline, obviously it does not require that much to be on top of that, right?
But you won't tell your customers that it's just not as shitty as paper.
Of course not. One of the key things is that you're able to, again, there's a lack of pilots. The students need to get through the schools as fast as possible, limit the amount of extra hours and whatnot. So having a training tool where you can sit at home in your sofa, put on a VR headset, and then you're in a cockpit that is scaled 1-to-1 compared to what you're going into in the simulator tomorrow. Being able to train all your correct procedures in the correct order is, approved in a training program that is approved by your organization. So you know that every single minute you spend in this thing is very efficient.
I think this is something you have to explain because most of the people out there will not recognize what this actually means. I guess this is the main part of training a pilot. It's not like I know that as a pilot, I need to have this airplane at this speed so that I can push or pull that lever so that the airplane will fly. That's the easy part, I'd say. What do they actually learn when they sit in your virtual reality cockpit?
When you go into this cockpit, the first thing you will see is that there's hundreds of different buttons. There's different systems. Looking back over the years, in the older days, you would have like an engineer sitting together with you in the cockpit, just making sure that the aircraft is flying and everything is under control. So now there are quote unquote only 2 people out there. So they need to fly the aircraft and then manage all the systems. So one thing is flying the actual aircraft, but it's also just managing everything, making sure that everything works, and then being able to handle any situation that is thrown after them. So every little mishap in the system needs to be taken care of. And the best way of learning how to take care of these things is repetition. Doing it over and over and over and over again. So it should be that if you wake up a pilot in the middle of night and say there's an engine fire, he will tell you exactly what he has to do, because that's the only way that he will be able to do it when you have 300 people behind you and it's in the middle of the day and you are, under
over the ocean,
tremendous amount of stress, thousands of miles away from home. If you can be calm and collected, we know how to do this. A little bit of a side note, a couple of years ago, there was a Danish F-16 fighter that had a mishap, and there's been like a
What's
Danish
a mishap?
television. Yeah, so the landing gear broke when he took off.
Okay.
So it was, there was a metal rod that was further down than the landing gear, so he could not land. And then there's like a 1 hour long interview with him where he's talking about how he's preparing himself for, basically jumping out of an aircraft, right? And then landing the aircraft in the water. And it was so interesting to hear him because it's like, of course it's scary, but he has done it so many times. He just needs to remember his training and then just pretend that he's sitting in a simulator and then pressing this button, prepare the aircraft, taking into the right things, and then, just do basically what the body does for you, right? And that's where VR becomes very, very efficient in a cockpit environment, because you have buttons in front of you, behind you, to the left of you, to the right of you. So by being able to sitting in a virtual space that is, all the way around you, and you can practice your muscle memory. So you can practice putting your hand to the bottom before, you even think about it. In our advisory board, we have this captain who used to fly the A320, which we spoke to him about this muscle memory. How efficient is this? And he told us a story that while he was flying, he thought about that he has to press a button. He would look at the button and put his hand and then press the button, because that's typically the way you do it. Then he was he had a break from flying for a couple of years, and then he had to go out to fly a simulator. And he was sitting in the simulator being like, I have done this so much, but I can't really remember what I have to do. And then he was just, going into this mood, and then all of a sudden he found his hands just going directly towards the buttons. So instead of looking at the buttons and putting a hand to the buttons, all of a sudden his hands were touching a button, and then he was looking at it and was like, oh yeah, that's the one I have to press. So can we just come close to that experience that people are sitting in VR and then putting their hand up to something and then like, oh yeah, this is where it is, right?
And that's possible because in VR, you are in the cockpit or not just looking at it. So you can actually build the muscle memory of touching or trying to push a button, because it's not looking at it, it's being in the actual cockpit and learning it and repeating it all the time.
Yes, exactly. And you can do it as many times as you want, right?
Yeah.
And you have to, even the buttons that are in the ceiling, you can't just pretend that you are reaching out. You have to reach out all the way. And that is the things that makes you
it's not like here, it's not like there, like 20 centimeters above your head. It's like higher, right?
It's full arm length above you.
You have to really grab to it.
You.
And yeah,
exactly. So, and that really is something that is helping your body remember these things. And then, of course, when you're in VR, you can also do other things, right? So within a cockpit, there's always two people in these airliner cockpits. If you take that as an example, the person that's sitting in the left seat is the captain. That is the person in charge. And on the right seat, that is the first officer. So that's the right-hand man, so to speak. So they have different things to do. There's different roles that you have to take, and there are different ranks. So the rank is which seat you're sitting in. And then there's something that the captain always does. And then there's something the first officer always does. So it's very well defined who does what. And then you have different roles. So you have somebody who's flying the aircraft, one of the two people, and the other person is then monitoring. So talking on the radio, communicating and
making jokes.
Yes.
Flirting with the flight assistant.
Yes. Getting coffee, all the good things. When you're able to do that in VR, then you can start putting colors to stuff. So all of a sudden you can have, every button that the captain has to press is orange. Everything that the first officer has to press is green. And then you can start making like virtual arrows and guidelines and guide arrows and all kinds of visual cues that helps the pilot understand which order to press the different buttons. And so the idea here is also that when you're used to seeing something that is flashing in front of your eyes, when you go out to the real cockpit afterwards, we are trying to achieve that when you're looking up towards some of the buttons, you can almost feel like they're flashing at you, or you can visually see these arrows that you've been used to looking at. So that just helps a lot by, because then you're activating your muscles, you can see some visual and you're reading something, and all of a sudden all these types of learning is activated instead of just reading a book and then imagining what you're sitting in here. So, the visual is it's just so efficient way of learning things.
When you sit as a pilot in a cockpit, you probably wear a headset, right?
In the bigger aircraft?
Yeah, microphone, something like a...
Yeah, some do and some don't. That's actually a good question. I actually don't know when. In the small aircraft, they always wear because it's so noisy, but in the bigger ones, they don't always.
Mm-hmm. But they have to, for example, do some radio stuff.
Yeah.
Then they will probably have something like that. And it's probably not a big one, but a smaller one.
Yes.
What I'm interested in is about the audio, because you can do a lot of immersive stuff with audio, and I don't know where the noises actually come from when you sit in a cockpit. When a button is doing when the lights or alarms where's the noise coming from? Can you emulate that too? Is that something which is important? Like one noise comes from the right, and then you have to look there and see, okay, there's the red warning light blinking, or another one is from the upper left or something like that. Is that something you have to think about?
Yes, especially on like fire alarms, where you have there are speakers in the cockpit, so the alarms are very intimidating, because this is something that you need to, you cannot end up in a situation where you need to wear a headset, because what if they take it off, right? Mm-hmm. So you will have the sound in the speakers that will make sure that you actually are looking in the right places, right? But yes, it is lights, it is audio things, and you need to have, there's also one of the benefits of having it's just another learning, the sounds having the right sounds of the fire alarm. I think most pilots, when they hear the fire alarm, the hair on their arms will stand up, because it is such a frightening thing that you never hope to experience in real life and only in the simulator. So this is just more of these things that you can squeeze into VR, forcing people to look at the right things, having the things in the right colors, or just mimicking, going to as close as possible to the real scenario of what they're going to do in the real world.
Yeah, and that probably it's very helpful that, for example, the Quest 2 has great speakers. They're not very high quality, but they are actually pretty good. So it might feel pretty realistic at the end.
Yes, and just having the multi-crew session where you're able to talk to each other, right? You will have some of the emergencies. You're wearing like a mask,
Mm-hmm.
so air mask or something like that, and you can all of a sudden in VR add the air masks too. So you can smoke in cockpit is also a thing. In the real simulator, they pour smoke into the cockpit. In VR, it's a little bit cheaper and easier to clean up to do that. So all these types of scenarios with sounds, visual things, head movements, arm movements, communication, it's always, we are pretty fortunate that everybody's speaking English. So you're also able to making sure that people are saying the right things. So if the airlines want everybody to say specific words at specific point in time, you can capture if people are saying the right words. And if they don't say the right word in the right order, then you cannot proceed. So it's very easy to spoon feed training using VR, because you can control, the whole environment around you. And there's nothing you can't control, basically. Obviously, you don't have the person sitting behind you shaking your chair, but I guess you can pay people to do that.
Yeah. Or invent a shaking chair.
Yes, exactly. I think there wasn't it Meta at some point that came up with an idea of Oculus where you can have a seat with small air bubbles that was opening now.
Oh, cool.
But it's also the hand tracking, right? Do you want to use gloves? Do you just want to use the camera to do the hand tracking? Do you want to do the controllers and whatnot? You just need to add as much as possible until it does not make sense. If you're making it more complex than it needs to have the adequate gain, there's no reason to add. As an example, I think hand tracking is an absolutely brilliant thing for many things. But when you're sitting in a cockpit and reaching to a button that is above your head and where you kind of sort of is not looking at the same time, then the hand tracking based on the cameras of the headset, is not that efficient. And then if it becomes a little bit, not yet, but then if it becomes a little bit finicky and it takes a couple of tries before you press the button, then it's just easier to use the controller. And that was actually the way we had with the eye track in the beginning, where it's but it just works so well, right? And you just get impressed by the fact that you can put so much technology into these relatively inexpensive headsets, and it just works, which is the best thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And maybe with the Quest 3 and of course with the Apple Vision Pro, those things might not be a problem anymore because of all the many sensors they are built in. Let's see if the pilots of the future can train in VR without actually having any controllers in their hand, because then it's maybe even more immersive. I don't know. Maybe there will be a vibrator in the headset in the future. The PSVR 2 has that already. So a lot of things are coming there. And yeah, maybe you can upgrade your training session with data gloves. Something you have probably also thought about it. Makes that any sense, or is that bullshit?
So we did a project together with a Greek company called Magos, who do these exoskeleton hands that you put on. So it allows you to use your hands while having them in VR, and it is just something else, right? It just takes VR to the next level, but it also comes at a complexity price and a trade-off between complexity and how easy it is to use, and they're not cheap, those gloves, right? So it's a little bit of what you're trying to achieve. Do you want 10 pairs of VR headsets, or do you want 5 pair of headsets and then 5 pairs of gloves, right? So, and that's, I think, from a legislation perspective, again, can you come in a situation where you're able to get the hours in your training for using eye tracking and gloves and whatnot, then it's perfect. If you just want to try to mimic then it might make more sense to be a little bit more conservative and a little bit more simple.
Yeah.
And then just have a headset, because there's less to charge, less to break, no Bluetooth connections that stops working, or, whatever. You can imagine these things.
At the end, it's all the different routines you have to learn. And that's not something where you need some data gloves or something like that. So it's so specialized, so niche that you can easily drop that without actually having that much of a problem, or it's immersive enough like that.
Yeah,
I just see all the data glove startups, and I think, yeah, that would be great, but you are data glove startup number 125. And no one of you have ever been successful, because we are just not there yet. And
but it's also the worst sentence in VR is, yeah, but we're not there yet, right? Because it's like buying a brand new computer, right? Well, tomorrow there will be a newer one. Yeah, but then in 3 years, you'll never bought a new computer, right? If you're always waiting for the next thing. I think from our perspective,
my dilemma.
Yeah.
My computer's 10 years old. I should buy a new one, but tomorrow comes out a new one.
Yeah, exactly. And then, it just needs to be AMD or Intel, God damn it. So from our perspective, I am more interested in making sure that your arm reaches out and touches the button than compared to if your fingers are manipulating the button in the right order, because you will also have buttons that has a little guard that you have to open up to access the switch and whatnot. And all of a sudden, then you spend a lot of time on trying to, how is the best way to open a switch? At the end of the day, just want you put your hand up to the button, and then you'll figure out how to push it. So I'm not doing VR Flow is not a knob simulator. It's a cockpit simulator for procedure training, right?
That's a very interesting, very great sentence, actually. It's not a knob simulator, but a simulation simulator, it's about the experience and not about the actual physical thing you do there. So yeah, great.
But again,
sentence,
if you need to take like 3 or 4 tries of trying to open a switch, or it's the classical thing, right? If you have to push the throttle from 0 to 100, okay, what happens if you press it to 99? Okay, well, you can always have some boundaries that says everything above 90 is good enough. What happens if it's 98? And then all of a sudden you are ending up by adding like what's called negative training, because you know that people are lazy, right? So if you only have to push it halfway up and they don't have to push it all the way up, then you learn that you only have to do it halfway up. And then all of a sudden you're sitting in a simulator only pushing it halfway and expecting it to continue the right way. So again, trying to make sense of adding the technology and the best way of training where it makes sense, and then cutting some corners and make it, just more user friendly and easy to use, so we don't get so frustrated while using it. Because at the end of the day, first time you put on VR, it is a little bit of an experience. There is, 5 buttons on each controller, and what does each one do, and how do I position myself, and how do I make sure that the headset's aligned. There's a lot of things to get familiarized the first time that you're trying a VR headset.
Yeah, absolutely. Daniel, to wrap things up, I have to ask you something about a topic we haven't been talking here on the podcast for a long time. It started in COVID times, at the end of COVID times, and it ended suddenly when artificial intelligence got hyped pretty much with ChatGPT. Of course, I'm talking about the Metaverse. How did the Metaverse hype influence you? What you do influence your customers, your product? Did you feel anything from that hype? Please give us a little bit of an insight about what that hype actually did with you and your startup.
I think it's a little bit like when you get these devices and they become, obviously it's been a strategy for Meta to make cheaper headsets, to get it out to the masses so people can test it out on themselves. I'm not necessarily a huge fan of everybody running around with VR headset and not talking to each other, because I think we learned a lot from COVID that these type of meetings are very, very good, but sitting together with people is just better. At least depending on who you're sitting with, of course. But in general, it's always nicer to meet people in person, right? So I think from my state of mind and my business, having as many people trying VR and having these Quest 2 laying around in the, in kids' rooms, and having people just to get access to the VR headsets have helped us a lot, because all of a sudden it was not €3,000 thing where you needed to have a big computer, and it was like you needed to have a master degree in IT to get it up and running. All of a sudden, it was in the news, and people understand. Then it's just
accessible.
a matter of it's accessible, and then it's just a matter of how good people are of imagining. Okay, now I'm sitting in the metaverse and looking at something. How would that work in another context? How would that look in a cockpit? Some people are very good at this. Some people are not so good at it. But I really think that the accessibility of the VR headset and the hype helped us a lot. But again, we are making a very niche product, a very niche software product. So I don't see, I don't see everybody training buttons in a cockpit, because I don't think everybody thinks it's that interesting.
So it actually didn't help you at all from the business side. Like, you didn't generate a lot of more customers. You didn't have to scale suddenly or something like that. This didn't happen actually.
Well, I think it did. We have customers where the connection started with the father buying the son Quest 2, and then the father being like, "Oh, what happens if I search for some kind of a cockpit training?" And then they find our software, and then they bring it to work and be like, "Hey, see what these guys can do." We have concrete examples of people that have just went onto the App Store and searched for A320, and then all of a sudden, like, "Hey, this could be pretty neat," and then bringing it to the training organization. So, but I don't know if that the metaverse. Obviously, it's a consequence of Meta being so pushy that they're making the devices so cheap. So in that regard, it's a huge help. But from Metaverse as a concept, I don't see it that much.
Yeah, I see. So that it's so accessible, and that they tried the kids headset and found actually your app. And this is also something where you have to tell, because your app is actually available for everybody to use, right?
Yes, you can find, or if you're using an iPad, you can go onto the App Store and search for the product called VR Flow. And if you are an Oculus user, or Meta user, as you probably should call it,
yes,
the Quest, you can find it in the App Lab. We have unfortunately not been promoted into the real Oculus store, but we are in the App Lab, and it's you can download apps for free just to test it out. It's one of those things that's, one size fits all, fits none. It's a great way of getting familiar with the technology, testing it out. But obviously, for the scaling it into our customers, we need to do all the customization that we talked about earlier. But it is available, and go download it.
And everybody can download it, and should actually download it. And when they put it on, what will they learn? Will they learn to fly a fighter jet, or will they be able to learn to fly a double-decker from the Danish Royal Academy of Flying, or what will they learn?
So we're putting, I think we have 5 different aircraft that you can train from. So it's like your 737 MAX, your 737 NG, which is it's been used by a lot of airlines. You also have the A320 available, but you also have made demo applications for like a smaller aircraft, so small single engine and twin engine. And our main reason for doing it, obviously, it just creates it's helping on the hype, and it's helping on people to get to know us. And that is actually the main reason why we're doing it, just because we can see that the best way of understanding how VR works is by trying it yourself, right? So by having people downloading a free app and then testing it out and be like, this makes sense, having to explain that using a video or Zoom call or face-to-face meeting or whatnot is almost impossible. So it's been a sales channel of ours to get like the foot into the door at potential customers.
Great. So you have done this 5 years now, and how many airplanes can you fly by yourself right now?
Absolutely none. I'm actually a car guy. It's a bit of a funny thing, but that was maybe also because I was not so hooked on the idea when my colleague Thor came to me the first time, because I didn't know much about flying and all the struggles there is in flying. I was more of a car guy driving like Formula 1 simulators in VR, right? And then being afraid of hitting the wall. So I can't fly anything, and to be honest, I don't think it would be good at all if you have this classical in the movies where they will call out over the radio on the aircraft, is there a captain on board or a pilot on board? I will not put my hand up. I'll just hopefully somebody more qualified than me will say something.
But if there's no more qualified than you, do you think you have learned enough through your own simulators to at least understand and try, and when you guided from the tower, you could maybe land an airplane?
I think if you were up, there's much more to flying an aircraft than just learning which order to press the buttons. But I'm pretty confident that if you are a pilot and you by using VR, you can learn a lot in a very, very short period of time. I would not trust myself landing an aircraft, but looking into, what people can do after a short period of time in our software, I'd rather pick that other guy who's already a pilot, right?
That was a very diplomatic answer, but I of course would try to land it.
You haven't seen me flying around. We built the first simulator, right, where you can actually fly it, and I crashed more than I've landed. So you will not want me to fly your aircraft. Let me just put it that way.
All right. Daniel, this was a great talk and great insights into your startup. And I think we already saw again how useful VR can be and is right now in production for teaching pilots to be better pilots, to be more secure about all the procedures, and learn while they are in the hotel room and waiting for the next flight. Daniel, when somebody out there wants to connect to you, what are your preferred channels?
Well, LinkedIn, I think, is the best way, or just send an email. Go to our website, vrpilot.aero, and then you can just contact us through there. You'll be amazed how many large companies have done it that way, and I absolutely smile every time we get these types of emails. So I think the best thing about pilots, which is also kind of sort of the worst thing about pilots, is they are not afraid to tell you if you're doing something wrong. But they're also very polite and, giving credit where credit is due. So, send an email if you have any comments or anything. If you want to try something out, if you know somebody, the sky's the limit within these types of fields. So we would love to have the conversation with as many people as possible, and then take it from there. So.
Of course, every link we have been talking about, you can find in the show notes. And this was Danile Maas, CEO of VRPilot. Thank you very much for joining us here on the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, and safe travels to everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
And that's it for episode 49 of Spatial Realities. Thanks again to Daniel for the interview. If you like this podcast, I would be happy if you could recommend it. Feel free to share the episode on social media, send it to colleagues and friends, and write a comment on Apple Podcast and Spotify. I'd also like to point you to our Discord server. You can find a link in the show notes or on spatialrealities.de. My name is Thomas Riedel, thank you for listening, and I can't wait to have you with us next time.
Dieser Podcast ist eine Droidboy-Produktion.